Jack's a senior analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Both Robert and Libby went through issues, and we could talk about this as well, that may or may not come up over the next couple of days. But if I could start big picture with you, I've also heard from many people that the expectations for this two-day trip for the president are relatively low. As a president with a lot of domestic issues, inflation, which we'll talk about later this hour, hanging over the domestic economy. Going to China now, what's he going to get out of it? Why does this matter?
Thank you for having me. I think really what the goal here is to find small niche wins that the president can sell back home domestically and to find stability amongst one of the most important relationships that the United States has abroad. President Trump, prior to the meeting, talked about agricultural goods, talked about Boeings, talked about a board of trade. These are all things that are wins that matter and have more salience now than they might have prior to the Iran conflict, of particularly looking to lock up agricultural purchases in light of rising fertilizer prices and selling Boeing aircraft in light of rising jet fuel prices, and having a board of trade that offers more tariff stability and offers also a semblance of control given the previous Supreme Court ruling against the president's previous tariff regime.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I have a few screens, see the president's arrival earlier in Beijing, to run through, beginning with the big what's on the table: AI, Iran, trade, of course, Taiwan, nuclear issues, rare earths, big for China, Russia, oil and natural gas. But I want to focus on business a little bit, in particular the CEOs that went with Trump. We had this screen made, I guess, a day or two ago. We had all these CEOs, Larry Fink at BlackRock, Tim Cook at Apple, and on, Steve Schwarzman at Blackstone. And then the plane stops in Alaska, and down here, the most valuable company in the world, NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, who's the CEO, hops on. And that is interesting because it brings up this conversation about how we should be interacting with China, our businesses. Is it cooperation, money-making, selling our chips like NVIDIA, or is it competition, keeping the chips away from China so we can win the race on AI and other things? So what do you think this week? It tells people that the president brought Jensen along.
I think the move to bring Jensen is a sign that the discussion around AI that's been talked about both in Beijing and Washington is alive and well. Something that I would note, though, is while there's been reported movement on export controls, the flow of some of these chips really has slowed. And so as a result, I think that the export control issue is one that certainly has taken a lot of interest within the administration, and particularly in Congress. Prior to President Trump's visit, Congress moved on several export-related control bills to push and tighten export controls, recognizing the danger of China's AI growth. So I certainly think that within Washington, there's a lot of movement on tightening export controls. So while Jensen is slated to go on the trip, he's on the ground now. I do think that there's certainly a push, a broader recognition across Washington, and in some parts of the executive branch, that export controls really are something that's key when it comes to beating China in the AI race.
At the end of the day, maybe some of this, for 2 days at least, with two heads of state meeting, comes down to tone. How is the president going to approach Xi? How's Xi going to approach Trump? And Republican James Comer was among those who said he'd like to see President Trump playing hardball. Here's what Comer said.
I would support banning anything from China if they don't stop their unfair trade practices of manipulating their currency, of stealing our intellectual property and our patents, and if they don't start complying with basic environmental laws and regulations that every other country on the planet complies with. So I think we have to play hardball here.
How tough do you expect Trump to be this week?
I think President Trump is looking to keep the trade truce that was negotiated last year in South Korea. And I think in large part, the truce is not so much a truce as it is a stalemate. Prior to that truce, we saw China put stringent rare export controls on rare earths. We saw the president put incredibly high tariffs on China, and both sides eventually backed away due to the pain that was mutually caused. And so I think as a result, part of the niche aspects of this summit and downplaying it is a result of this structural stalemate that both sides continue to work on. Prior to the summit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Finish that thought. I have one more question after, but finish that thought prior to the summit.
I think it's notable that prior to the summit, China rolled out a new way of putting export controls to lock in some of the dependencies and trade surpluses it's created, as well as the United States announcing a 301 investigation, potentially with the ability to re-put some of the tariffs on China and keeping both of those in their back pocket as well.
My other question was about Taiwan, and the question was basically, because I was listening to the president the other day, maybe even been during our show when we carried it live, and someone asked him about, selling arms to Taiwan, and he said, we're going to talk about that. Like, in other words, he and Xi would talk about that. Why? Why is he going to talk to the president of China about who we sell our arms to? I mean, isn't that our business, and why would they get a say in that?
Something I think it's an important point. Obviously, I think Taiwan will certainly likely come up. If the United States bring it up, then the Chinese likely will. I think it's important to note that President Trump has previously sold a large $11 billion worth of package to Taiwan. And so certainly the appetite for selling arms to Taiwan is there. Taiwan just announced $25 billion in new spending on U.S. arms. So certainly the relations between Washington and Taipei are strong on the arms issue. President Trump may be looking to gain some type of leverage, but certainly when it comes to the facts on the ground and the delivery schedules, Washington has certainly not shied away from selling, and this president has not shied away from selling record amounts of arms to the island. And
that's another arms sale that's been he's been delayed, though, right? That's he is awaiting his approval. Just wondering why he waited to approve it and now says he'll talk to Xi about it.
So that's a good point. There was the package previous in December, the $11 billion record-breaking package, and there's been a new package that is being delayed. I think that this is a case in which there are sometimes delays around these types of summits to avoid to essentially clear the table for other issues. But at the same time, I certainly think that Taiwan, having appropriated this money, is certainly in a position to purchase these arms, and that's something that really matters, is showing particularly the president of Taipei is interested and looking to buy large amounts of U.S. weapons.
Jack Burnham, appreciate your time. We'll see the president later tonight, our time. It's now 13 minutes past the hour, and here's a look at